the Canada's national cyber strategy and how it's being released and rolled out across the country. And I think I started my career in the federal government many, many years ago, and I can tell you, I think with the strategy we have today and where we're going, it's certainly not the same federal government I knew years ago. So it's very exciting to see the changes that are coming and where we're heading in the industry. So on the panel today, very pleased to have with us Colleen Merchant, DG National Cybersecurity for Public Safety Canada, Francis Castonguay, DG Partnerships and Risk Mitigation for CSE, and Mark Flynn, who many of you heard speak yesterday, Director of Cybercrime for the RCMP. So welcome and good morning. So maybe we'll get started. Colleen, just might be good for everyone to understand what went into developing the strategy and where we're at today, maybe some background, and then how we got to where we are now.
All right, I'd be happy to. But first, I do want to thank Heather and you, Tyson, and the rest of the team, because this has not disappointed this year. I was here last year. It was a great conference, and it's a great conference this year, too. So thank you. It's a lot of work that went into it. In terms of the lead up to the strategy, I do think it's worth a revisit for those of you who were here last year to understand how the strategy was being developed, because it has an excellent foundation. In 2015, the Prime Minister gave the Minister of Public Safety the mandate to lead a cyber review of current existing measures to protect Canadians and Canadian infrastructure from cyber threats. So what this did is it was a catalyst for a huge review that we led. Part of the review was internal to the federal government, so we did a little bit of navel gazing and looked at how we govern cybersecurity, because there are about 14 departments and agencies that are directly involved in cybersecurity activities within the Government of Canada. We also looked at how's our IT doing, because in the first strategy, which came out in 2010, a lot of that was dedicated to making sure that we were cleaning up our own backyard, that we had our own IT system secure so that we could deliver services to Canadians and keep their information secure. And we also had an evaluation done of the 2010 strategy. So internally, we had a really good set of information. We also went externally, and many of you may be aware of the external review that we did. The centerpiece was an online workbook that we put out with several questions centered around several themes, had room for, we didn't ask just open-ended questions, we also left room for any input that people would want to provide on these various themes. We also went out, we had round tables, we did in-person consultations, we went across the sectors, critical infrastructure owners and operators, academia, associations. We also got a lot of input from provinces, territories, and just citizens who were interested. So all in all, for the external part of the consultation, we got over 2,000 responses, and we got somewhere between 80 and 90 papers. And I'm very happy to say, and I was very pleased, that in going through the input that we got, it was very well thought out. It was substantial. And that, coupled with the internal review that we had done, gave us, I'd say, an excellent foundation and a lot of context from which to work. We got an independent third party to actually analyze the data as well and put out a report. It's a Nielsen report that you can find online. You can either Google it or through our website. But some of the key findings that we got out of the review were there was a call for standard certification legislation, and we were very happy to see that there was an understanding that more financial and personnel resources were required across all aspects of cyber. There were calls for clarity on government roles and responsibilities, because even though, as Mark was saying yesterday, internally we function fairly well, we have a lot of internal coordination, it's not that easy if you're outside looking in. Where do you go? Who do you talk to? Who's responsible for what? So there was some clarity that people had asked for around that, and leadership from the federal government. And I think the two things that are important in this venue here are there was a lot of input that we received for public education and awareness, as well as training for cybersecurity professionals and law enforcement. So that very good baseline that we had, given the review that we did, in combination with just an overall current context. So when you're the federal government and you're looking at the nature of the threats. And when the strategy came out in 2010, the nature of the threat that we were most concerned with were nation states, so threats to our national security. But over time, and as we become much more digitized and interconnected, it's become very clear to the government that cybersecurity is just as important for economic security as it is for national security. So then you get into the realm of cybercrime. Cybercrime was very, very apparent and very significant, and it's a big part of what we took into consideration in developing the strategy. And I'm going to focus a minute on why that economic security and cybercrime piece is so important to Canada. So a Canadian Chamber of Commerce report came out last year about cybersecurity in Canada. And what the report indicated was that the Canadian economy is made up of 98% small and medium enterprises. Small and medium enterprises employ 90% of our workforce. That was in 2015. And businesses of less than 100 employees make up over half of Canada's GDP. So this is our economic engine, these small and medium enterprises. But yet 71% of the data breaches happen to them. It's our most vulnerable population. So the effect of cybercrime and this balance between economic and national security was another thing in the overall context that we had to take into consideration. Also, one of the big things is the speed with which technology, our culture, our geopolitical situation changes. And when you're the federal government and you have to take very deliberate consideration and you have to consult and you have to understand the overall context before you make a decision, it seems kind of slow on the outside, but there's a reason for it. So how do you minimize the time that it takes to come to a very good decision on something that's changing so quickly? So you need that additional flexibility and agility to be able to move with the landscape. So really, this is how we ended up where we ended up with the strategy. The strategy in title was announced in Budget 2018. So Budget 2018 gave us about $500 million for cybersecurity over a 5-year period, and about $110 million every year thereafter. And that was to implement a new strategy. So the strategy itself builds on the previous strategy in 2010. So all the initiatives that we undertook to implement that strategy are still valuable. Some are still ongoing, and we'll build upon those. In terms of the flexibility and agility that's required, what we did in this strategy, instead of making it prescriptive, we made it outcomes-based. So you'll see, and as was announced in the budget, that we have 3 overarching goals. So we've got a goal of secure and resilient cyber systems, an innovative and adaptive cyber ecosystem, and effective leadership, governance, and collaboration. I'll come back to that one in a second. So this outcomes-based approach is allowing government to evolve with the landscape. So it'll allow us to propose new means to achieve the objectives and the goals in the strategy. As the landscape changes, it'll allow us to be innovating as things change. And the strategy is not so much what to do, but where to go. And there's a hope that will provide that overall leadership from a federal level, that it will allow all of us to work together to meet these outcomes. So I go back to the effective leadership, governance, and collaboration. There's a very, I'd say, a very heavy sense within the federal government that as much as we'd like to wave a magic wand and spread the fairy dust and make everything better, we can't. And we definitely can't do it alone. So there will be a very heavy emphasis as we move forward, with or without the strategy, on partnerships and making sure that we facilitate force multiplication within communities of interest. And two of the key initiatives that were announced with the budget to support the implementation of the strategy are moving toward these same goals. So obviously the two major initiatives that were announced were the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, which my colleague Francis will speak to, and the National Cybercrime Coordination Unit, which Mark will talk to. So with that, I'll turn it over.
Thank you, Colleen. Well, I think it's fascinating to see how cyber and the issues around cybersecurity are essentially woven into the fabric of all business and all industry, totally across the board. So, Francis, CSE back in the day was hidden in the Canada Post building, and it was hard for people to figure out what the agency did. Well, it's come out of it's now in the limelight. You have, the new building next to the CSIS HQ. You're right in the spotlight now with the new strategy, and CSE really has a bit of a public comeuppance when it comes to people understanding what you do and the critical role that CSE plays in the cybersecurity strategy. So maybe take some time and walk the audience through an introduction to CSE if they're not aware, and how CSE plays in its new strategy.
Thanks, Tyler. I'm also very excited to be here and talk about this because it's one of the reasons why I just came back to government was to be part of this adventure of making this Canadian Cyber Centre a reality. It's been a long time in coming. So I'll pick up on some of the themes that Colleen brought up. And il me fait plaisir aujourd'hui de vous donner un aperçu du rôle du Centre de sécurité des télécommunications du Canada dans l'écosystème de cybersécurité. Je vais couvrir des exemples de partenariats avec l'industrie et les institutions académiques. Today, I'd like to highlight a little bit of the role of communication security establishment. I don't think we've done a very good job of marketing what it is that we do in a very clear way to the Canadian public. So bear with me as I do this for the first time. You get it firsthand. So basically, our role is to drive the resiliency in cybersecurity for all of Canadians. It's a new mission for us to expand beyond the Government of Canada. And that's why I think the role that the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity will play, and I'll touch on that a little bit more detail later. I also want to touch a little bit on some of the initiatives of partnerships and with industry and academia that we've already started that journey even before the announcement of the budget because we saw a real need for it, and how we're hopefully making a difference to make a stronger and more resilient workforce in the STEM fields as well. So a few words about CSE. In the Government of Canada, CSE is the cybersecurity lead agency. And what that really means is that we're responsible for monitoring the Government of Canada systems and also to provide the defense against all cyber threats. And we try to protect Canada's most sensitive information. We do so in many different ways. So let me highlight a few examples. So we provide expert vendor-neutral advice and guidance to help others implement and roll out secure IT systems. We do a lot of partnering with manufacturing and vendors of products to ensure that there's a degree of security in everything that they produce. We also certify advanced commercial as well as government-grade cryptographic equipment to make sure that good crypt is produced. We defend the Government of Canada systems against all sorts of malicious activity, and then we share some of that with the industry as much as we can. We've developed a large number of tools to leverage machine learning concepts and recognize evolving cyber threats. Our defenses are then automated and adapted to those threats without any human intervention. So CAC's role is not to duplicate the efforts of commercial practice or the private sector. Rather, our role is to bridge the gap between what their products and services currently offer and today's most sophisticated cyber threats. We partner with Canada's allies and industry partners worldwide and to make us all safer Canadians. So how are we moving on in these partnerships? So we've primarily focused, as I said, on protecting the Government of Canada in the past, but we've switched gears. This is our year where we are coming out, and now we're more focused on individual Canadians as well as small and medium enterprise and larger enterprise here in Canada. Ultimately, our goal is to improve the overall cyber ecosystem in Canada by developing these partnerships in a very deep way. So some of the examples include University of New Brunswick, the Canadian Institute for Cybersecurity. We've already engaged with them, and with industry and other levels of government as well. And we try to encourage research and development in the Canadian cybersecurity ecosystem because it just makes sense. It takes a widespread collaboration and partnerships between all Canadian critical infrastructure sectors as well to develop innovative solutions to thwart current cyber threats. And we're very keen to collaborate. In fact, we're committed to sharing what we learn through all of our defensive activities, as most likely any threats that we face in the Government of Canada are also probably hitting every Canadian in different aspects. We want to provide Canadians with an edge against malicious cyber actors in such a way that makes Canada a bad target, or one where we raise the price of them attacking Canadians. We want to help improve security through all of the critical infrastructure sectors, or silos of excellence, as I would call them right now. And we also, in the sharing aspect, we provide indicators of compromise information through automated means. And we're working with our partners to help them be ahead of the enemy, and to be aware, to help Canadians be aware of all the actions that they can take to protect themselves. So that's one aspect that you'll see a large difference in our role, is the advice and guidance that we typically would provide was aimed at cyber professionals in the government space that would help roll out IT systems at enterprise scale. Well, we also want to be able to help out my mother-in-law, who's 80 years old, with her iPad. What good advice do I give her? And so that's what we're looking for to do in our new mission space with the Cyber Center. So I just want to touch a little bit onto why we're expanding a little bit beyond government systems. So why are we reaching into that space? Because a significant amount of the intellectual property in which our information economy resides, not on government systems. It resides in the hands of private individuals and startups and small and medium enterprise. So there's also a lack of a clear picture from our perspective. So despite what people may think, we do not have eyes on everybody's system. So I'll give you a good example. We have a very good picture of exactly what threat actors are trying to leverage, what kind of information out of government systems. And I was talking to the aviation sector last week, and I showed them a chart where only less than 1% of what we see is targeted against the transportation sector. Now, clearly, intuitively, you can already think that that's an incorrect figure. That statistics will skew you into thinking that nothing's happening against our transportation sector. In reality, we're just blind to it because we're not collecting any information about that sector in Canada. So an important piece of us partnering is us having visibility in the sharing of information where we would have eyes and therefore be better prepared to give you the right kind of advice to protect against threats in your sector. There's also no requirement for breach incident reporting. So we have no statistics. If people get breached, we don't hear about it in Canada. And the other thing is that cyber capability and knowledge is not even. So it'll range from non-existent to highly sophisticated and anywhere in between. But we need to raise the bar there as well. I think we have a responsibility, and we have the knowledge. So that's where we want to increase our footprint. We're building relationships with academia and over 100 organizations in key critical infrastructure sectors. We started mostly with telecom, energy, financial, and transportation, but we're not limiting it to that. We're working across borders as well, because many of these sectors are, like the entire North American space is interconnected. We also work in an advisory capacity with the Canadian Cyber Threat Exchange, or the CCTX. And the founding members of this group is a collective of Canada's largest banks, transportation, telecommunications operators, many organizations. And the aim of this platform is to share cyber threat intelligence and analysis. And we act as advisors. I'm a permanent attendee to the board, and we also ultimately want to see this unique Canadian platform succeed. And it will reach its success, I think, when the small and medium enterprises will join this collective of mostly large enterprises right now. And as Colleen mentioned, that's an important and large sector to include in our defensive posture. Let me share a few more concrete examples of how we're partnering. So last October, we released, it was mentioned yesterday, we released Assembly Line. So it's a malware detection and analysis tool. It was developed by our own cyber defense program. It's designed to assist cyber defense analysts in automating the analysis of malware files as they come in. And so this frees up time for the analysts to move on to all sorts of other work if they don't spend as much time doing that analysis. We released it to businesses, private researchers, industry, academia, and this allows a cybersecurity community to jointly evolve this valuable open source piece of software, and to look for other ways to help each other and to closely develop more capabilities. In fact, to deploy the assembly line here in New Brunswick, we worked with Bulletproof, who's one of our sponsors for this summit. In a different capacity, CSE played a major role in facilitating December's Hacker Gal Hackathon. Just by show of hand, anybody ever hear of Hacker Gal? So it's a Canadian organization that aims to introduce school-age girls to coding. The hackathon was designed so groups of girls would work together, learn the basics of coding, and create a functioning animation. And the overall goal is to spark interest in young Canadian girls in technology. Our partnership in Hacker Gal was just one example of our increased efforts to promote STEM education and careers to young girls across Canada. And earlier this year, we had some employees volunteer as mentors with Technovation as part of our community outreach program. So Iridescent is Technovation's global technology entrepreneurship competition for girls. Our volunteers mentored girls of high school age as they learned about different phases of application development over a course of a 12-week period. In the end, the teams developed their own app and presented it for a chance to win a spot on a national and an international competition. This encourages them to pursue STEM careers. And it's through these types of partnerships that the cyber community can look to encourage the next generation to join us in the cyber field. Le 1er avril dernier, le Centre de sécurité des télécommunications a réorganisé son équipe de cadres afin d'accroître nos efforts dans la communauté de recherche et le réseau académique. Entre autres, nous avons commencé à faire le lien entre notre centre d'apprentissage et en cybersécurité et d'autres institutions afin de partager nos ressources. During this very summit, I've already begun the dialogue with the Canadian Nuclear Lab leaders to ensure that CSE contributes by providing support from our Chief Research Officer to help guide the research efforts in the most critical areas. And we're also looking at the CyberNB CI-SOC initiative and how CSE can help share automated indicators of compromise. So let me move on to the Canadian Centre of Cybersecurity. You've waited long enough. So as Colleen mentioned, the budget highlighted some funding from the National Cybersecurity Strategy. The Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity will receive $155.2 million over 5 years, as well as $44.5 million annually thereafter. So the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, or simply the Centre as we're calling it, is going to bring together the federal operational cyber expertise from across the federal government under one roof. It'll provide Canadian citizens and businesses with a clear and trusted place to turn to for cybersecurity information. It will advance partnerships and dialogue with provincial, territorial, municipal organizations, the business community, academia, and international partners. This unified approach to cybersecurity in the federal level will build on Canada's already world-class cybersecurity capability. The Centre will be the country's authority on cybersecurity as a single unified Government of Canada voice and source of expertise, advice, guidance, services, and support on cybersecurity operational matters. So what will this Centre include? We will be joining the forces of existing operational capabilities, so very mature capabilities that exist within Public Safety, Shared Services Canada, and CSE's IT Security Group. We'll be rebranding all these teams and bringing them all together. We're actually reinventing the assumptions we have about the limitations we have because we're in different departments. And this will facilitate the workflow and increase our speed of delivery of our services. Ensemble, avec l'appui de nos partenaires et des différents paliers du gouvernement ainsi que le secteur privé, le Centre de cybersécurité sera idéalement positionné pour faire place aux défis et menaces auxquels nous faisons face aujourd'hui et demain. With this investment and the continuing to work together, we can and will make Canada stronger and more resilient against cyber threats. And if you're interested in partnering, just reach out to me. That's it.
Great. Thank you, Francis. It's phenomenal to see where CSC is going and how it's becoming a public fixture for everyone to access. I think common theme you're hearing at this conference is on collaboration between industry and government and academia, and that the cybersecurity threat can only be countered through successful collaboration. So that's exciting to see. Mark, on that topic of collaboration, maybe talk the RCMP's role in the new strategy and how it aligns and supports the other members in the strategy and what the RCMP is doing.
Absolutely. To give you a little background, Colleen mentioned the extensive consultations and the feedback that was provided on cybersecurity issues. Loud and clear in the feedback was that police need to do more. There needs to be more ability for police to have an impact on the actors that are doing this. We were very happy to see that because that's a message we had also been putting forward, and we believe is a critical element in cybersecurity to actually have repercussions for these actions that cyber criminals are taking that are creating all the cybersecurity issues that are out there. So I thank anyone in this room that took the time to provide that feedback, and we know some of the companies that wrote in as well put extensive amount of resources behind that feedback. So a big thank you from the police as well, I can believe from the Government of Canada, for that effort that was put in place. In that message and in the consultation was that police lacked a coordination mechanism as well as a reporting mechanism. And for us, reporting is really fundamental for us to understand who's causing the problem, where's the problem, and what do we need to do. Yesterday I spoke about the lack of reporting in one major ransomware campaign, that less than 1% of the victims in Canada actually reported it. So if we're going to do something about this problem, we have to understand it. So in addition to the center, there was also an announcement about an online reporting system that will be operated by the RCMP on behalf of law enforcement in conjunction with the center. And that's really important. There's a report, if you want to Google it, it's a Europol 2016 report. They call it IOCTA, I-O-C-T-A, that describes a disconnect between the perception of police, industry, financial sector on who is actually causing the problem. And that report indicates that there was virtually no overlap in their study when it was done, and that's around the 2016 timeframe. So Francis spoke about it, Colleen spoke about the collaboration that's necessary for us to tackle the problem. That's a big element of what the National Cybercrime Coordination Unit is going to do. It's going to be providing that coordination function for all law enforcement across Canada. So the announcement is for the RCMP to create this center, but really the center is for all law enforcement across the country. One of the other elements that led to its creation was a Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police resolution calling for such a center and for the online reporting to be created. So the RCMP has several hats, one of them being the steward for national police services. So those are services that it makes sense to be run by one organization and to be provided to all law enforcement. So think about criminal records, fingerprints, our DNA labs, etc. So the National Cybercrime Coordination Unit will be operated by our National Police Service group, performing key functions for all law enforcement. Number one being coordination for all the cybercrime efforts. So they'll be looking at all the cybercrime reports that come in to the online reporting system, as well as to the individual law enforcement agencies. If somebody calls their local law enforcement, they're going to be looking at all that information, collating it, creating intelligence reports in the form of an intel report to be used in a police investigation for the goal of prosecuting and holding to account the individuals that are responsible for it. Okay? They're also going to provide digital evidence expertise. So we spoke yesterday as well about the ability of small, even some medium and large police organizations in Canada to do the work that's necessary to investigate cybercrime. Everybody can't build the same expertise, the same toolkits as Francis spoke about that they're providing. This team will be a resource where all the local, provincial, municipal, and federal, when needed, can contact this unit and obtain advice on what they can do in their particular investigation. It will be supporting all types of cyber as well. And again, I mentioned the reporting mechanism, they'll be managing that. So those are the four main functions there. But really it's about connecting the dots, understanding where the problem is, creating packages similar to our child exploitation center that's out there, and working with those police forces in the area that are responsible to target the individuals and investigate it. In doing that, they've recognized right away that there needs to be collaboration with private sector. So this group will also be doing a lot of outreach and in coordination with the center. They are not one place, and there has to be separation between police activities and government, because our actions are not government activities, right? They're policing activities. But I don't want you to get the impression that because it's not part of the center that there won't be extensive and regular, meaningful collaboration between the two groups. We're not going to create misunderstandings or confusion on where you should go to report. Think of it as the reporting for cybercrime is to have an impact on the problem from the perspective of removing the actors, having prosecutions against them so they can't continue, And the center is the remediation, the expertise, the advice, and the collaboration on the cybersecurity prevention, et cetera. I think that's fairly accurate feedback. Okay, so that's the differentiation, because we did hear loud and clear, as Colleen mentioned in the public consultation, that public, small, medium, large stakeholders in this were confused on where to go in the government. So creating two separate entities, we're hoping doesn't cause that issue and that everybody understands the difference. So in addition to that, so that's the National Cybercrime Coordination Unit that's there. In addition to that, in the RCMP strategy and also in the budget announcement was the increased federal enforcement that I spoke about yesterday. And that we believe is going to work closely with the center to properly target and use our federal resources to go after those key cybercrime actors that are impacting broad areas, both federal, provincial, and municipal investigations, actors, mandates, et cetera. So when we look at the center and what it's going to do for law enforcement, there's a key element that has to follow on that. And there's some concern amongst law enforcement about how are they going to handle what comes out of this reporting system and what comes out of the center. And the announcement of the two federal cyber teams, we are going to be looking at that cybercrime as a service band, but there is the necessity for all the municipal and provincial law enforcement agencies to build capacity to address the cybercrime that's occurring in their area that falls within their mandate to look after. And the center is going to help them do it, but it's necessary that they take some efforts internally as well. So the various provinces and municipalities, we're hoping will build that capacity to work with the unit as well, because we think there's going to be a fair bit of reporting come in, and that's going to require a response. And the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police are ready for it and hoping that they can handle it. And they're going to need some help. They're going to need industry help. They're going to need the public's help to take on this community problem. So.
Right. Thanks, Mark. So I know the audience is ready to chime in here. So we want to make sure there's ample time for questions. So we'll look at the audience. Any questions that we want to bring in from the audience on the topic of the national cyber strategy and how it all aligns? So I don't know if there's microphones. Maybe we can hand out the microphones. There we go, down front.
Say are the key points for New Brunswick in supporting the achievement of the goals out of the new national cybersecurity strategy?
I'll take that. That's a good question for this audience, for sure. While I can't go into the details of what's in the strategy, obviously, until it's announced, from the public consultation that we had, obviously, there were two main things that came out that New Brunswick can really pick up on, and that's the training. Train. We need young people that are trained, that are digitally aware. We need professional development, skills development in the cybersecurity field, and that's what Cyber Smart, that whole initiative here in New Brunswick, is all about. And also the collaboration piece. I think in particular with Cyber New Brunswick, the initiatives that are going on within that whole initiative are very complementary to anything that the federal government would want to do, with or without the strategy. But in terms of these outcomes-based, how we're going forward with the outcomes, I think they align very, very well with what Cyber New Brunswick is doing. So I'd encourage Cyber New Brunswick to carry on and do everything that you can to move ahead. Like I said, very complimentary, and I appreciate that.
That's great feedback. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Melissa.
Good morning. So I was hoping, you might not be able to say, but when could we actually expect the strategy? I've been up here in February and March and April. Everybody says it's coming tomorrow, the next day, the next week. And then also, could you describe how the cybersecurity strategy is linked and embedded or entangled with the digital strategy that's also forthcoming?
So okay, one word on when the strategy will be out: imminently. So, but don't hold me to that, but it's imminent. In terms of linking with other strategies that have come out, we've had the innovation strategy. There's also been, the Defense Department came out with their policy review. And so when we went through in developing the strategy, we obviously consulted very closely with all the other departments that are involved. ISED and the Department of Defense. We've got we're looking at NRCan, all the other departments that are responsible for critical infrastructure. And obviously the digital strategy was something that we're folding into and integrating with as well. So we were very careful to look at all the moving parts. It was complicated, but it was kind of fun.
Question?
Quelles opportunités d'emploi vous prévoyez de créer lors de la création de ce centre?
Vous pouvez répéter la question?
Oui, quelle opportunité d'emploi est-ce que vous prévoyez pour la création de ce centre?
Alors, quand on entend des grands chiffres comme 155 millions, les gens s'imaginent immédiatement qu'on va avoir beaucoup de contrats, beaucoup d'emplois. La réalité, c'est qu'initialement, c'est un regroupement d'experts qui existe déjà dans le gouvernement. Bien des initiatives additionnelles vont être nécessaires pour faire plus d'engagement, pour développer plus de ressources et des matériaux, comme j'expliquais, pour les gens à qui nous ne donnons pas d'avis et de guidance présentement. Donc, il va y avoir certainement un petit peu d'augmentation de notre effectif, mais cela, ça va sûrement prendre plusieurs mois avant qu'on voit un changement dans notre effectif. L'autre aspect qui va ralentir notre effectif, c'est que l'engagement de nos employés requiert une cote de sécurité qui prend beaucoup de temps à passer à travers. Alors, je voulais juste mettre une bémol un peu sur la croissance du centre. Ça va être graduel, mais définitivement, il va y avoir une croissance.
There will be a day where we'll be NSA size. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Any other questions in the audience? Raise your hand and we'll get the mic to you.
Hi, my name's Nevin Marquardt. I'm a cybersecurity student at Brown University. Across all three panelists, I heard the issue with regards to reporting. And in my assessment to date with regards to cybersecurity, one of the issues that I keep coming up with is the incentives to report. And on the corporate side, they're very low. You don't really want to report that you were breached if you don't have to. And so, I'm just wondering, in one case, there was a reference to the Chamber of Commerce and a bunch of statistics. And then there was a reference that there wasn't much reporting going on at all. And then there was a reference that we're going to create a tremendous system to be able to keep track of all of the reporting. So I just didn't know if someone on the panel wanted to talk about the incentives that will cause reporting into the systems. Because again, I think it's very important, for instance, in cybersecurity insurance. One of the issues we have with cyber insurance is we don't have a lot of experience. So we don't know how to price cyber insurance, except that major carriers just want share. And so if a certain carrier says, I want 15% share, they go out into the marketplace and they just price so that they can get the share. They're not sure whether that'll be good business or bad business, but if you're a major carrier and you want to be in this game and you believe that it'll be important, you can't be left behind. So, so my question, if there's just a comment, because I don't think there's a solution to this as of today, but are there any comments with regards to creating incentives to actually have reporting of breach incidents?
Nice. Mark, do you want to grab that?
Do you want me to go ahead?
Sure.
Yeah, okay.
All right, I'll add in after.
Okay. So from a law enforcement perspective, one of the big barriers we think for reporting is a lack of belief that law enforcement will do anything or have the capacity to do anything about it. So number one is we're trying to build confidence that we can. And you'll see some announcements, or you've seen some announcements, hopefully, where police have had an impact on cybercrime, have arrested some major actors. You can look at some of the darknet operators, the credential reseller out of Toronto, the hacker for hire out of Ancaster, Ontario, et cetera. So we're trying to get the message out about the impact that we're having. The other element that we heard was people are confused about where to report. So if I'm the victim of a ransomware campaign or business email compromise, et cetera, where do I go? Do I go where the actor is? I don't know where the actor is. Do I go to the front door of my detachment, et cetera? So we're trying to make it clear where to go and easier to make a report. So that's where the online reporting system is, and to instill that confidence, okay? Now, as far as incentives or motivation, I think there's a few things that are coming out. If you look at the changes for mandatory reporting to the Privacy Commissioner and notification of the victims, in my experience, as soon as a compromise becomes publicly known, that's when the press offices or the media offices within the corporations, if they have such an entity, quickly create media lines, and they usually include, we're working with police, right? So we've seen it where for months, where it hasn't been publicly known that there's been a compromise, where there's no engagement, no discussion, no media, anything. However, as soon as a compromise is revealed through an online posting wherever, that's usually when the phone rings. So I think that mandatory reporting, even though it's not to police, that it's going to be to the victims as well as to the Privacy Commissioner, is going to change the ability and probably the desire of companies to keep it quiet. I believe they'll engage more timely with police when the instances occur, because to go forward to the public and say this occurred and no, we haven't called police is not going to be an acceptable message. So the ability to hide is going to be gone from that. So those are the main ones. And as well, we're working closely with a lot of industry and trying to get them to report to us when we hear of things that are going on, as well as when we don't, just to engage with them in helping us understand who we should be targeting. And I think that that's going to instill confidence as well, so that when they are a victim, not just when they see things being attempted against their networks, but when they're actually a victim, that relationship will be well established and that they'll come. I'm not a big believer of a stick that we need to be able to walk around and whack people with. I think that we need to build the confidence and the partnership and the reporting systems that facilitate it. So that's the incentive.
Colleen, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, I'll add into that too, because I did want to talk a little bit about the incentives for reporting to the Canadian Cyber Incident Response Center, or CSIRC, within public safety. There, it's an anonymous, like, there's nothing that legislates you have to report unless it's the upcoming, changes to the legislation around privacy. But if you have an incident in your company, there's nothing that says you have to report it. So CSIRC has well over 1,000 partners right now, and what happens is they're going through their daily look, or their 24/7 look at what types of malware are on the system and filtering those out, they can report those. They send those in anonymously. Everything's anonymized. It's not classified. And then the CSIRC team will provide a value-add analysis of all this malware. So is this malware related to that? Oh, how can we trace it? We work with the intelligence agencies to kind of map these things and figure out, is this a real threat? Is this something that's going to propagate? Is it something that's growing? Is it targeting a particular thing? And so that value add is disseminated to the whole community. So by providing that reporting, the incentive is you get value-add analysis back, and you get much more information than you're actually providing. So in that respect, there's an incentive for that type of reporting as well, and it's anonymized.
Great. Question at the back, Scott.
I'm a health privacy lawyer, and my question is, you've mentioned many priority parts of the sector. Does anyone have any comments about the major health systems? And again, we have lots of small organizations with the same requirements legally to safeguard information and have security. I'm in Ontario, and I'd say we're in a high state of mixed readiness at best, probably quite vulnerable to security threats. We don't mandate privacy impact assessments. I've retained Bulletproof to do threat risk assessments, so that's a good thing, but they're not required. So is there any sense of what piece of the puzzle is reserved for the health sector?
Is reserved for what? Oh.
Sure.
So I mentioned so the public safety breaks it down into 10 critical infrastructure sectors, and I listed 4 where we've been doing some very specific things with these sectors. Clearly, as we open up the center, the idea is to be more inclusive of the entire realm of critical infrastructure. As much as we've perhaps limited our engagement in the health sector only because, and a little bit touching upon the question of incentive of reporting, is if we have limited resources, we're going to put them to the priorities that affect what we think are the highest threats. And so if we have no data about what's going on in that space, the chances of getting attention will be lowered. Not to say that there won't be any, because one of the goals of our center is to make available a lot of resources and our technical expertise, along with practical advice and guidance that anybody can use. So if you don't have a proper cyber program, or if you don't have the level of staff to help with the security awareness, there'll be a lot of resources available from the center that you can draw on and raise the bar for an understanding of what you need to do in your sector. But definitely that's a conversation that needs to evolve. I do believe there are some sectors are more difficult, and this is why, touching back on the question of what can, the center, like what can happen here in New Brunswick or in any province to help with the partnering and making Canada safer. We're looking for opportunities where there are either groups who are taking a leadership role and allowing us to reach, from a hub and spoke perspective, a larger community that's already organized. And I'm seeing it happen in the aviation sector. So NAV Canada last week, for example, brought in all the air operators, all the airport authorities, every airline operator into one summit to start that conversation. So the one-to-many relationship is where we'll want to invest our energies so that everybody gets it within their own communities as fast as possible.
Colleen, I know you wanted to add.
Yeah, I'll chip in a little bit because I have a soft spot for the healthcare industry and that sector, because over the last couple of years, I've seen a real growth in that sector in understanding the issue and being aware and paying attention to it. So I would like to thank that sector. A couple of years ago, there wasn't a lot of awareness within that, and it's really been ramping up. I see that firsthand within public safety, where we do look at all 10 critical infrastructure sectors and try and make sure that everything's going well. But the healthcare sector has really come a long way, and they've been a very good partner, and that's much appreciated. And I think NotPetya in the UK had brought an extra spotlight on it. So there's becoming a high level awareness that these are people's lives. And so I appreciate you bringing up the question, because your sector has come a long way.
I'll put in another word on that. I think from the provincial perspective here in the province, so we're blessed here that we are able to work so closely together with different sectors. So CyberNB, its strategy is connected with the digital health strategy here in the province, and so there's strong alignment between the cyber mandate of the province and the digital health mandate of the province. So that's certainly exciting. All right, well, I think we have time for a couple more questions.
Hi.
Oh, back here, yep.
Hi, my name is Colleen Bolden. I'm the director of the Digital Lab as well as the Digital Identity Program for the province. And I work across the country at DIAC and also IMSC on joint councils, identity management. We have a lot of dialogue at the national level around GDPR because, of course, we're dealing in a global environment. And GDPR, if you're not familiar, is the privacy laws that were brought in a couple of years ago into the European Union, but the teeth came in this month, and that's the 4% of global revenues. So my question is back to the stick. We do have mandatory reporting. We do have, as part of our TIPA, that was refreshed and brought in play April 1st. We also have mandatory PIAs and TRAs on all systems coming online. Part of the concern and the dialogue is around the stick, because we do believe that privacy and security are lockstepped and so important as we move forward to digital societies. And it's got to work coast to coast. And it's going to take everyone working together to keep us secure and keep us private. Europe has taken that approach of 4% of global revenues. I know Canada is looking at strengthening their privacy laws. Do you see that stick coming in? Because my colleagues across the country really think that's making a difference.
Who wants to tackle that one? Sure.
I'm not sure who's best to answer that one.
I think Francis had his hand up quickest. So.
No, I was trying to wave it off to my colleagues. Sorry, I can't.
Well, I'll
sure.
chip
Colleen.
in. So I agree with you 100% that security and privacy are in lockstep. And that's fundamentally important to the federal government is, as I said initially, making sure that we can deliver services but keep citizens' information very private as well. Time's up. In terms of the stick, though, we're not there yet, but we're looking at all the possibilities because we do take citizens' private information extremely seriously, not just for us, but for the sectors that we deal with as well.
So for the first panel of the morning, I think we're off to a great start on day 2 of this summit. So a warm round of applause for our panelists today, and enjoy the rest of the day.